The morning sun had just started to rise above the rooftops, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. The streets outside Jefferson Middle School were alive with the familiar sounds of a school day beginning, pulling up to drop-off students, the squeak of sneakers on the pavement, and the laughter and chatter of children as they rushed to greet their friends. Inside the school, the hallways buzzed with excitement and noise. Lockers slammed, books rustled, and the smell of freshly sharpened pencils mixed with the faint scent of breakfast from the cafeteria. Amara walked through the front doors with her backpack hanging loosely over one shoulder. She had a warm smile on her face as she waved to a few friends she passed. Today felt like just another normal day, and she was ready to get through it with the same positive energy she always carried. Amara was known among her classmates for her bright personality and her confidence. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but when she spoke, people listened. One of the things that made her stand out the most was her hair, thick, healthy curls that framed her face like a crown. She wore it proudly, not just because it was beautiful, but because it was part of who she was. She walked toward her locker, humming a tune she had stuck in her head from the radio. A couple of friends ran up to her, giggling about something funny that had happened on the school bus. They chatted as they exchanged books and made their way toward homeroom. The atmosphere was lighthearted, filled with the usual morning gossip about which teacher was giving a surprise quiz and which cafeteria lunch was the good one. As Amara entered the hallway leading to her class, she saw familiar faces. Awesome. Students were leaning against lockers, scrolling through their phones. Others were hurrying so they wouldn't be late. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, but no one seemed to notice. It was the kind of ordinary school morning where everything felt predictable, and Amara liked it that way. In her homeroom, Ms. Collins, the teacher, was already seated at her desk, sorting through a pile of papers. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk and the lemon-scented cleaner the janitor used. Desks were neatly lined up in rows, and the big classroom windows let in the soft glow of morning light. Amara took her usual seat near the middle of the room, unpacking her pencil case and notebook. As more students came in, the volume of chatter grew. A few kids laughed loudly in the back, sharing a joke they probably hoped the teacher wouldn't hear. The sound of sneakers squeaking on the tiled floor mixed with the rustle of backpacks being opened and closed. For Amara, it was a comforting sort of chaos, the kind that meant school was starting just like it always did. She glanced at the clock above the whiteboard. There were still a few minutes before the bell rang. She leaned over to talk to her friend Mia, who was telling her about a new TV show she had started watching. Amara laughed at her friend's dramatic reenactment of one of the episodes. Everything felt normal, safe, and routine. If someone had told Amara that this ordinary school day was about to turn into one of the most unforgettable and upsetting days of her life, she would have never believed them. At that moment, she was just a girl enjoying a regular morning, completely unaware of the events that would soon unfold and change the way she saw her teacher, her school, and even herself. The bell finally rang, signaling the official start of the day. Students shuffled to their seats, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. Ms. Collins stood up, adjusted her glasses, and began the morning announcements. Amara sat quietly, listening, her mind already drifting toward the things she had planned for after school, maybe hanging out with friends at the park or working on her art project at home. Little did she know, the calm, predictable rhythm of this school day was about to be shattered. Something was going to happen that would make the noise of the hallways, the light-hearted laughter of friends, and even the comfort of her routine feel like they belonged to a distant, almost forgotten world. This was the start of a day that Amara would remember for the rest of her life, not because of the classes she attended or the conversations she had, but because of one decision made by one person that would leave an emotional mark far deeper than anyone could see. Ms. Collins had been teaching at Jefferson Middle School for over 15 years. She was the kind of teacher students had mixed feelings about. Some thought she was strict but fair. Others found her rules too harsh and her opinions too strong. She had a reputation for enforcing discipline in ways that made her stand out from the other teachers. That morning, she seemed distracted, her eyes occasionally narrowing at Amara's desk as the students settled in. Amara was busy copying down the morning announcements from the board when she noticed Ms. Collins' gaze lingering on her. It wasn't the friendly kind of attention a teacher gave when they were proud of a student's work. No, this felt different, measuring, critical. Amara's hands slowed on the paper, and she wondered if she had done something wrong. She quickly checked her clothes, her desk, her notes, but nothing seemed out of place. After the announcements, Miss Collins walked slowly between the rows of desks, peering over shoulders. When she reached Amara, she stopped, her shadow falling across the girl's notebook. "Amara," she said in a voice that was calm but firm, "I need to talk to you for a moment. Step outside with me." The classroom went quiet for a second, the way it always does when something unexpected happens. Amara felt the eyes of her classmates on her as she stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She followed Ms. Collins into the hallway, feeling the knot in her stomach tighten. Out in the hall, Ms. Collins gestured toward a small, unused storage room at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, the smell of cleaning supplies drifting out. Amara hesitated, unsure why they were going there. "Inside, please," the teacher said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Amara stepped in, her sneakers squeaking softly on the floor. The room was dimly lit, shelves lined with boxes of WH-ELF. Only Ruby Kiss has the luxurious texture. That Clevius has the luxurious gesture. It leaves, on me, we lie so we're eggs. While mlastim sabors, while Suis squeaking softly. It was Clevius squeaking softly, with Sis K, with seasoned Caleb, with Kze Mod, you will lie side, we will lies to see. We will K we live, we a Cle it cacade by their ide, we will liz it live sit. It's unlie with call the moak crew we lies I pit gaiet kai you save s to desi screek it to see mali to be sick it to gaiet at kuzli stipkadet. Paper, old books, and a few plastic bins. A narrow table sat in the middle, and on it, Amara noticed something that made her heart skip a pair of electric hair clippers. Before she could ask, Ms. Collins closed the door behind them with a quiet click. "Your hair," she began, her voice low but sharp, "is against the school's grooming policy. It's too distracting, and it needs to be fixed right now." Amara blinked, confused. She had never heard of such a rule, and no one had ever told her her hair was a problem. She felt a flush of embarrassment and anger rising in her chest. "But, my mom," she started, her voice trembling. "This isn't about your mother," Ms. Collins interrupted, picking up the clippers. "This is about discipline. You'll thank me later." The sound of the clippers buzzing filled the small room, loud and unsettling. Amara's breath quickened. She wanted to run, to push past the teacher and get out, but her legs felt frozen. In place, she could barely process what was happening as Ms. Collins stepped closer. "Sit down," the teacher instructed. Amara obeyed, her mind spinning. This wasn't a punishment she had ever imagined. She thought about her friends in class, wondering if they could hear the buzzing. She thought about her mother, who always told her to be proud of her curls. And then, before she could say another word, she felt the cold metal of the clippers touch the back of her head. The first pass sent a thick lock of hair tumbling to the floor. Amara's chest tightened, her hands gripping her knees so hard they hurt. She could feel tears welling in her eyes, but she bit her lip to keep them from falling. Lock after lock dropped to the ground. The buzzing seemed to grow louder, drowning out her thoughts. Her mind flashed with memories, her mother braiding her hair on Sunday evenings, her friends complimenting her style, the pride she felt when she looked in the mirror. Each strand that felt like a piece of her identity being taken away. When Ms. Collins finally stepped back, the clippers went silent. Amara reached up and touched her head, feeling the short, uneven stubble where her curls had been. She didn't recognize herself anymore. The weight in her chest felt unbearable, but still, she said nothing. Ms. Collins placed the clippers back on the table as if nothing unusual had happened. "Now you look proper," she said, matter-of-factly. "Go back to class." Amara walked out of the storage room slowly, her steps heavy. The hallway felt colder now, and the light harsher. She kept her head down, but even then, she could sense the stares of students who had seen her enter the room with her beautiful curls, and were now seeing her leave with none. She didn't say a word as she returned to her desk, but her friends' shocked faces told her everything. This was not going to stay quiet for long. Something deep inside her knew the events of this morning would spread far beyond the walls of this school. Amara walked into the classroom as if the floor had suddenly become heavier beneath her feet. Every step felt slow, deliberate, like she was trying to make herself invisible. But there was no hiding. The room felt eerily silent the moment she crossed the threshold. Conversations died mid-sentence. A pencil rolled off someone's desk and clattered on the floor, the sound echoing louder than it should have. The whispers began almost instantly. "Is that what happened to her hair? Oh my God." Her seat felt miles away, but she kept walking, eyes fixed on the ground. Her hands gripped the straps of her backpack like they were the only things keeping her from falling apart. She could feel heat rising in her cheeks, the kind that came from being stared at like you were some strange exhibit. She sat down without looking at anyone. Her friend Mia leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Amara, what happened?" Amara opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She wanted to explain, to say something, anything, but the words were stuck in her throat. If she spoke, she knew the tears she was holding back would spill over, and she refused to give Ms. Collins the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Meanwhile, Ms. Collins moved to the front of the class as if nothing unusual had happened. "All right, everyone, take out your math books," she said in her usual tone, her eyes never meeting Amara's. But the other students couldn't focus. Heads kept turning toward Amara. A few tried to hide their shock, but others didn't bother. One boy in the back even took out his phone, slyly aiming the camera in her direction. The soft click of a photo being taken sent a fresh wave of humiliation crashing over her. She reached up instinctively, touching the rough stubble on her head, and quickly pulled her hand away as if the reminder was too painful to bear. Then it happened. The sound of a message alert pinged on someone's phone, followed by muffled laughter. In a matter of minutes, the photos were being passed around. Some were sent through group chats, others uploaded to social media with captions that made her stomach turn. She caught a glimpse of one on a classmate's screen. "Oh my God. Look what happened to Amara." By the time second period started, the entire hallway seemed to know. Students lingered near her locker, trying to sneak a look. A group of 8th graders she didn't even know giggled and whispered as she walked past. It was like her private pain had been turned into public entertainment. But Amara wasn't the only one getting messages. In a house not too far from the school, her mother, Mrs. Jackson, was scrolling through her phone when a notification popped up from a friend. She opened it to find a blurry photo of Amara in class, her hair completely gone. At first, she didn't believe it. She thought maybe it was some kind of filter or a prank. But then another photo came in clearer. This time, man, the truth hit her like a punch to the chest. Mrs. Jackson's hands trembled as she tried calling the school. The office secretary answered, but her vague, hesitant words only made things worse. "Yes, ma'am. There was an issue involving Amara and her teacher. We're looking into it." Mrs. Jackson didn't wait to hear the rest. She grabbed her car keys, her mind a storm of confusion, anger, and fear. She knew her daughter's hair wasn't just hair, was a part of her identity, a part of their heritage, a part of the love and care she had poured into raising her. And now it was gone. Back in the classroom, Amara sat rigid in her seat. Barely hearing the lesson, she stared at the clock, willing the minutes to pass faster. But time seemed to have slowed to a crawl. Every laugh in the hallway, every whisper behind her back felt like a dagger. She wished she could disappear, too. Just melt into the floor and escape the weight of every pair of eyes on her dot then. Without warning, the door to the classroom swung open. The sound made everyone jump. Standing there, framed by the doorway, was her mother. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Amara. The shock on her face melted into something fiercer. Something that made even the most talkative students go quiet in that instant. Everyone in the room knew something was about to happen. The room froze the moment Mrs. Jackson stepped inside. She didn't rush in, didn't shout right away. She stood there for a heartbeat, her gaze fixed on her. Daughter Amara sat at her desk, shoulders hunched, eyes red, her once beautiful curls gone. That sight alone was enough to make Mrs. Jackson's chest tighten like someone had placed a heavy stone inside it. The students went silent, their curiosity fighting with their instinct to stay out of whatever was about to happen. Even Ms. Collins, who had been writing on the board, turned slowly to face the doorway. Her usual controlled expression flickered, just for a second, into something that looked like guilt. Amara. "Baby, come here," Mrs. Jackson said, her voice low but trembling. Amara stood slowly, her legs weak, and crossed the room. She didn't meet her mother's eyes at first, afraid that doing so would make the tears spill over. But when she finally looked up, Mrs. Jackson gently cupped her daughter's face, scanning her head with disbelief and hurt. Her fingers trembled as they traced the rough, uneven stubble. "What happened?" she asked, her tone soft but heavy with anger. The question hung in the air like smoke. Every student was watching, holding their breath, waiting for the answer. Amara swallowed hard, but before she could speak, Ms. Collins cleared her throat. "I can't explain," she said, taking a step forward. Mrs. Jackson's head snapped toward her eyes, sharp. "Oh, I'm sure you can. Please explain to me why my daughter came to school with her hair and is now sitting here like this." Ms. Collins straightened, trying to project authority. Her hair was in violation of school grooming policy. It was too distracting for the classroom environment. I handled it? You handled it?" Mrs. Jackson repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You handled it by shaving my child's head, without my permission, without even calling me." She needed to learn discipline, Ms. Collins said, her voice cooler now, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "This is about maintaining standards." Mrs. Jackson took a step closer, her voice gaining strength. "Discipline, you think? Stripping a 12-year-old girl of her hair, something she loves, something that's part of her identity's discipline. You think humiliating her in front of her classmates is how you maintain standards?" The tension in the room was electric. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some exchanged wide-eyed glances, as if this was a scene they'd only seen in movies. Amara stood quietly beside her mother, her heart pounding. She had never seen Mrs. Jackson this angry before, not the everyday kind of annoyed, but the kind of rage that burned deep, the kind that came from love and protection. Ms. Collins, perhaps sensing she was losing control of the situation, tried again. "Ma'am, if you have an issue, I suggest you speak to the principal." "Oh, believe me," Mrs. Jackson cut in sharply. "I will speak to the principal. I will speak to the school board. I will speak to the press if I have to. But right now, I want you to understand something." She pointed toward Amara, her voice steady and fierce. That is my daughter. Not your project, not your example, not your property. You do not get to decide what happens to her body, her hair, or her dignity." The words hit the room like a clap of thunder. A few students flinched. Others stared down at their desks. Even Ms. Collins seemed momentarily speechless. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Mrs. Jackson turned back to Amara and placed an arm protectively around her shoulders. "We're leaving," she said, her tone final dot. As they walked toward the door, the entire class watched in silence. Just before stepping out, Mrs. Jackson stopped and looked back at Ms. Collins one last time. "You should be ashamed," she said. "Because one day, you'll realize this wasn't about rules, it was about you taking away something you had no right to touch." With that, she guided Amara out into the hallway. The classroom door closed softly behind them, but the weight of what had just happened stayed heavy in the air. No one moved for several seconds. Even the sound of the clock ticking on the wall seemed louder inside. Ms. Collins stood alone at the front of the room, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. Outside, Mrs. Jackson was already dialing her phone. Her voice low and urgent as she told someone, "Meet me at the school. Now." And deep down, everyone in that classroom knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The hallway outside the classroom felt like a different world compared to the tense silence. Amara and her mother had just left behind. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and students loitered by their lockers, pretending to be busy, while sneaking curious glances at the pair. Word had already traveled faster than Mrs. Jackson could walk. Some kids leaned close to whisper, their eyes darting toward Amara's shaved head before quickly looking away when Mrs. Jackson's sharp gaze swept over them. Mrs. Jackson didn't slow her stride. Her arm stayed firmly around her daughter, holding her close as they headed straight for the principal's office. Her voice was low but steady as she murmured to Amara, "You're safe now, baby. Nobody's touching you again." The receptionist looked startled when they entered. She glanced from Mrs. Jackson's fierce expression to Amara's head, and her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Mrs. Jackson didn't wait for her to speak. "I need to see the principal," she said, her tone leaving no room for delay. "Of course, ma'am," the receptionist replied, fumbling for the phone. It took less than a minute before the principal, Mr. Harris, appeared in the doorway of his office. A tall man with salt and pepper hair, he carried himself with an air of calm authority. But when his eyes fell on Amara, his brow furrowed. "Come inside," he said quickly. Holding the door open, Mrs. Jackson didn't waste time. As soon as they were seated, she told him everything, her voice controlled but edged with fire. She described how her daughter had been singled out, taken into a storage room, and had her hair forcibly shaved without permission. She spoke of humiliation, of the damage to her child's dignity, and of the violation of trust. Mr. Harris listened quietly, occasionally glancing at Amara, who sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. When Mrs. Jackson finished, there was a moment of heavy silence before he spoke. "This is extremely serious," he said. "I want to assure you, this is not in line with our school's procedures or values. We will investigate this immediately." "Investigate?" Mrs. Jackson shot back. "You don't need an investigation to know this was wrong. You need accountability. Today." Mr. Harris nodded slowly. "I understand. Ms. Collins will be removed from her duties for the time being while we review this incident. I also want to speak with Amara privately to make sure she feels safe and supported." Mrs. Jackson hesitated, then shook her head. "You can talk to her while I'm here. Oh, she's been through enough." As the principal began asking gentle questions, Amara's voice was barely above a whisper. She recounted how Ms. Collins had called her hair distracting, led her to the storage room, and shaved it without warning. The clippers, the buzzing sound, the feeling of her curls falling away. She told it all, her eyes fixed on the floor. By the time she finished, Mr. Harris looked visibly troubled. "Amara, I'm so sorry you went through this," he said. "We'll make sure you get the support you need." But while the principal spoke in careful, measured tones, the story had already begun to take on a life of its own beyond the office. While students were texting friends in other classes, sending photos, recounting the confrontation they'd just witnessed. By lunchtime, posts were flooding local community Facebook groups. Some were angry, others in disbelief, but all of them carried the same question: how could a teacher do this? In the corner of the cafeteria, a group of 8th graders huddled over a phone, watching a shaky video someone had secretly recorded of Mrs. Jackson confronting Ms. Collins in the classroom. The clip was less than a minute long, but it was explosive. By the end of the day, it had already been shared hundreds of times in another part of town. A local journalist scrolling through social media caught sight of the video. The headline formed in their mind instantly one that would spark outrage and draw attention, far beyond the school's boundaries. Back in the principal's office, Mrs. Jackson's phone buzzed relentlessly in her purse. Each notification another. Ping of messages from friends, family, and strangers offering support. She ignored them for now. Her focus was on Amara, who was finally leaning into her mother's side, her small frame relaxing just slightly for the first time since the morning. But even as Mrs. Jackson comforted her daughter, she knew this wasn't the end. This wasn't something that could be quietly fixed behind closed doors. It had gone too far, and too many people already knew. And somewhere in the building, Ms. Collins was sitting alone in the staff lounge, staring at her hands, aware that her career and reputation might never recover from what she had done. The storm was coming, and it was going to be loud by the next morning. Jefferson Middle School was no longer just a quiet corner of the city, had become the center of a storm. Overnight, the shaky video of Mrs. Jackson confronting Ms. Collins had gone viral, leaping from student group chats to local Facebook pages, then to Twitter and Instagram, where hashtags began to sprout like wildfire. Hashtag Justice for Mara trended. Locally by sunrise, the video wasn't long, just 57 seconds, but it was powerful. Viewers saw Mrs. Jackson standing in front of the class, her voice trembling with anger as she demanded to know why her daughter's hair had been shaved. They saw Amara beside her, silent but visibly devastated, her head lowered as classmates stared, and they saw Ms. Collins standing frozen, unable to defend her actions. In living rooms across the city, parents were replaying the clip, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some had never heard of Jefferson Middle before. They were talking about nothing else over breakfast by 8 a.m. Local news vans were parked outside the school, their camera crews braving the chilly morning air as reporters prepared for live coverage. Parents dropping off their kids slowed their cars to watch, some honking in support when they spotted Mrs. Jackson stepping out of her vehicle. Inside the school, tension was thick enough to touch. Students whispered in hallways, phones hidden under desks as they refreshed social media for the latest updates. Teachers glanced nervously at the principal's office, where the blinds were drawn tight. The air felt charged, as if something big was about to happen. At 9:15, the first wave of protesters arrived. They were a mix of parents, activists, and community members, some holding homemade signs reading "Hands off our kids and hair is not a distraction." A few carried photos of Amara from before the incident, smiling with her curls intact. The crowd was small at first, but it grew steadily as word spread through the neighborhood. Mrs. Jackson stood at the center of it all, her daughter by her side. Amara clung to her mother's hand, overwhelmed by the attention but comforted by the fact that so many strangers seemed to care. People approached to hug her, offer kind words, or simply stand in silent solidarity. "I'm here because this could have been my child," one woman said to a local news camera. "Schools are supposed to protect our kids, not humiliate them." Midday, the story had reached national outlets. Talk shows picked it up, sparking heated debates about cultural respect, racial bias, and the rights of students in public schools. Hair discrimination laws were brought up in conversations, and experts were invited to explain the deep cultural significance of black hair. Meanwhile, Ms. Collins stayed hidden. According to rumors, she had been placed on administrative leave, but the school refused to confirm details. Her colleagues avoided discussing the situation openly, but behind closed doors, the staff lounge buzzed with whispers. Some defended her intentions, insisting she was only following rules. Others admitted they'd never seen anything so extreme. In all their years of teaching, back on the steps of the school, the chants of the protesters grew louder. Respect our kids. No more discrimination. Justice for Amara. Inside his office, Principal Harris knew this was no longer just a school matter, it was now a public relations crisis. He had been on the phone all morning with the school board, trying to balance the demands of the community, the media, and district policy. Every decision he made would be scrutinized, every statement picked apart, and through it all, Amara sat quietly beside her mother, watching strangers hold signs with her name on them. Just 2 days ago, she had been another face in the crowd. A normal student starting an ordinary school day. Now, she was at the center of a fight she hadn't asked for. A symbol in a battle that reached far beyond the walls of Jefferson Middle. As the sun began to set, Mrs. Jackson addressed the crowd through a borrowed megaphone. Her voice rang clear and strong. "We are here because a line was crossed. We are here because no child should be stripped of their dignity in the name of rules. And we will not stop speaking until something changes, not just for Amara, but for every child who comes after her." The cheers that followed were loud enough to echo through the school's empty hallways. And somewhere, watching the coverage from behind closed curtains, Ms. Collins knew the fight had only just begun. The following week began with a tension that hung over Jefferson Middle School like a storm cloud. For days, the protest outside had grown larger, with parents and community leaders taking turns holding signs, speaking to reporters, and demanding justice. The viral video had now been viewed millions of times across multiple platforms. And news crews from outside the state had arrived to cover the unfolding controversy. By Monday morning, the district had officially announced a full-scale investigation. A team of administrators and legal representatives entered the school carrying clipboards, binders, and recording devices. They set up a temporary meeting room in the library, its tall shelves now serving as a backdrop for hours of questioning. Every detail of the incident was being dissected every minute leading up to Ms. Collins calling Amara into the hallway. Every possible witness statement, and even the school's handbook, policies on grooming and appearance. Students were pulled from classes one by one to give their accounts. Some looked nervous. Others were defiant, eager to defend Amara and tell the truth. Mia, Amara's closest friend, didn't hold back when it was her turn. She didn't do anything wrong, she told the investigators. Her hair wasn't bothering anyone. Ms. Collins just didn't like it, and she said it was a distraction, but that's not true. We all loved Amara's hair. The investigators took notes quickly, asking for exact words Ms. Collins had used. Mia recounted the whispers, the storage room, the buzzing sound everyone in the hall claimed they could hear. She also confirmed that Ms. Collins hadn't called Amara's mother before taking action. Meanwhile, Mrs. Jackson had been preparing for her own moment in front of the school board. She wasn't going to walk into that meeting empty-handed. She had gathered printed screenshots of the school's official policies, video clips from students, and a stack of statements from parents. She had even spoken to a lawyer who had begun drafting a formal complaint under state laws, protecting students from discrimination. The school board meeting that Wednesday evening was unlike any in recent memory. The auditorium was packed to capacity, with standing room only and rows of reporters lining the back wall. Local police were stationed at the entrances, not because they expected trouble, but because emotions were running high. When Mrs. Jackson stepped up to the podium, the room went silent. She placed her folder of documents on the stand, took a deep breath, and began. My daughter Amara walked into school last week confident, happy, and proud of who she was, she said. She walked out humiliated, traumatized, and stripped of something that meant more to her than anyone in this building apparently understands. This was not discipline. This was not a mistake in judgment. This was an abuse of power. Her words were steady, but her voice carried the weight of every parent in the room. She spoke about the cultural significance of hair in the Black community, about how it is tied to history, heritage, and identity. She described how Amara now avoided mirrors at home, how she woke up in the middle of the night in tears, how she no longer wanted to go to school. Then she held up a photo, Amara smiling just a week earlier, her curls vibrant and full, and placed it beside a photo taken after the incident. The contrast was striking, and gasps rippled through the audience. When she finished, the applause was immediate and loud, some people even standing. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The chairperson, a middle-aged man with glasses, cleared his throat before speaking. We understand the gravity of this matter, and we assure you appropriate action will be taken. But the crowd wasn't satisfied with vague promises. Shouts came from the back. What action? We want answers now. Then, unexpectedly, Ms. Collins herself entered the room. She hadn't been seen publicly since the day of the incident. The room fell silent as she walked down the aisle toward the microphone. She looked smaller somehow, her posture less rigid, her face pale. She hesitated, her voice breaking slightly. I thought I was doing what was best for the classroom. I see now that I was wrong. I see the pain I caused, and I am sorry. It was not the explosive defense some had expected. But for many in the room, the apology felt too little, too late. Mrs. Jackson didn't look at her. She kept her eyes forward, her hand resting on Amara's shoulder. The board announced that Ms. Collins would remain on administrative leave pending the results of the investigation, and that they would review all grooming and dress code policies for cultural sensitivity and parental rights. It was a small step, but for the crowd, it was proof that the fight was making an impact. As the meeting adjourned, the media swarmed outside, cameras flashing as Mrs. Jackson and Amara emerged into the cool night air. The street was still lined with supporters holding signs, their chants rising into the night. And though Amara stayed quiet, there was a small shift in her posture, a tiny sign that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to believe she wasn't standing alone anymore. Weeks passed, but the echoes of what happened at Jefferson Middle School didn't fade. The story had reached far beyond the city. National talk shows invited Mrs. Jackson for interviews. Podcasts discussed the incident in the context of cultural discrimination, and advocacy groups reached out, offering legal support. What had begun as one teacher's decision in a small storage room had grown into a movement for change. For Amara, the days immediately after the school board meeting were still difficult. She struggled to look in the mirror, her hands instinctively reaching for curls that were no longer there. At school, some kids were kind, offering smiles or sitting with her at lunch, but others were curious in ways that made her uncomfortable, asking to feel the short hair or making thoughtless comments about how different she looked. Mrs. Jackson, determined to rebuild her daughter's confidence, reminded her every day, "Your hair doesn't make you beautiful, Amara. You were beautiful before, you're beautiful now, and you'll be beautiful when it grows back." She helped Amara pick out colorful headscarves and hats, teaching her how to tie them in creative styles. Slowly, Amara began to walk with her head a little higher. The school district's investigation concluded with a formal statement: Ms. Collins would be terminated from her position, and the district would implement mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff. In addition, The grooming and dress code policies were rewritten to ensure they could never be used to target a student's natural hair or cultural expression again. The changes were sent to every parent in the district, with a public apology attached. On the day the new policy was announced, Jefferson Middle School held a special assembly. Students, parents, and teachers filled the gymnasium as the principal spoke about respect, understanding, and the importance of valuing differences. He didn't mention Amara by name, but everyone knew why they were there. When the assembly ended, students came up to Amara Soom, quietly squeezing her hand, others saying, "I'm sorry for what happened." It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded her that not everyone had stood by in silence. Outside of school, the movement had taken on a life of its own. The hashtag Justice for Amara transformed into hashtag Respect Our Kids, used by parents across the country to share their own experiences with unfair treatment in schools. Petitions for stronger anti-discrimination laws gathered tens of thousands of signatures. Local leaders invited Mrs. Jackson to speak at community forums, where she urged parents to know their rights and stand up for their children. One Saturday afternoon, a community event was held in Amara's honor at the local park. There were food stalls, music, and speeches from activists and educators. At the center was a stage where Amara was called up alongside her mother. The crowd erupted into cheers as she stepped forward. For a moment, she froze hundreds of eyes were on her, but then she spotted Mia in the front row, grinning and giving her a thumbs up. Amara took the microphone from her mother and said, in a voice that trembled only slightly, "I didn't ask to be in this situation, but I learned something important. Even when someone tries to take away something you love, they can't take away who you are inside. And they can't take away your voice unless you let them." The applause was deafening. People stood, clapping and whistling, some wiping away tears. It was the first time Amara had spoken publicly about what happened, and though her speech was short, it carried the kind of weight that people wouldn't forget. Months later, her hair began to grow back, thick and healthy. She wore it naturally, just as she had before. Each morning when she looked in the mirror, she didn't just see her reflection, she saw her resilience. She saw a girl who had been humiliated but hadn't been broken. A girl who had turned pain into power. And somewhere deep inside, Amara knew this would be a story she would carry for the rest of her life, not as a wound, but as a reminder that sometimes even the smallest voices can spark the loudest changes.